You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. In the heart of Moscow, a family hired a nanny to care for their young daughter. She was quiet, polite, and kept to herself, just another face in the city. But on a cold February morning, the unimaginable happened. A fire broke out in their apartment, and when authorities arrived, they made a horrifying discovery: the decapitated body of a 4-year-old girl. The nanny had vanished. Hours later, a woman in black was seen pacing outside a metro station holding the child, severed head shouting threats and prayers as the city watched in shock. Was it terrorism, madness, or something even more terrifying? This is the case of Anastasiya Meshcheryakova, a story of untreated mental illness, broken systems, and a tragedy no one saw coming. Chapter 1. The nanny from Uzbekistan, Anastasiya Meshcheryakova, arrived in Moscow from Uzbekistan. Like many other migrant workers seeking better opportunities in Russia's capital, she was hired by a young Russian family to care for their 2 children, a common arrangement in Moscow, where both parents often work long hours. By all appearances, Anastasia was unremarkable. She was 38 years old, quiet, and never made much of a fuss. She performed her tasks without complaint and was entrusted with significant responsibilities, including supervising the children alone at home. To the parents, she was just another nanny, someone who could be relied upon while they managed their careers. But behind her subdued demeanor was a long, untreated history of mental illness. Anastasia had previously been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in Uzbekistan and had spent time in psychiatric hospitals there. Reports would later indicate that she had been prescribed antipsychotic medications but had stopped taking them. She had no close friends in Moscow and was largely isolated. Her mental state began to deteriorate in silence. The family who hired her was unaware of her psychological background. No mechanism existed to flag this kind of information. It was a quiet oversight, one that would have devastating consequences. Chapter 2. A crime hidden by fire. On the morning of February 29, 2016, the routine of a typical Moscow day was shattered. Firefighters were called to a 3rd-floor apartment on Narodnogo-Opolchennaya Street in northwestern Moscow. The call was for a blaze, assumed to be accidental or electrical. But when emergency responders arrived and extinguished the fire, they found a horrifying scene inside. Lying in one of the rooms was the decapitated body of Anastasiya Meshcheryakova's 4-year-old charge, a girl named Nastya. The child had been killed hours earlier, and the fire had been deliberately set, likely as a means to destroy evidence or distract emergency responders. But Anastasia was gone. Her whereabouts were unknown, and her absence made her the immediate suspect. Authorities launched an intense search, fearing that someone capable of such a crime might strike again. The child's parents were taken in for questioning, but were quickly ruled out. The focus shifted fully to Meshcheryakova, now a fugitive in one of the world's most watched cities. As the media picked up the story, the Russian public began to panic. The idea that a trusted domestic worker could commit such a gruesome act and still be at large was too shocking to absorb. Chapter 3. Black-clad horror at the metro station. Hours after the body was discovered, something deeply disturbing unfolded in Moscow's metro system. At the Oktyabrskoye Pole Station, one of the city's busy hubs, commuters were shocked to see a woman in a black abaya, a full-body covering often associated with Muslim culture, pacing erratically outside the entrance. In her hands, she held something small and round. As she began shouting and waving the object, bystanders realized in horror she was holding the severed head of a child. It was Anastasiya Meshcheryakova. Footage captured by eyewitnesses shows her pacing the sidewalk, shouting incoherent phrases, including Allahu Akbar and references to revenge and terrorism. At one point, she yelled that she had a bomb and threatened to blow herself up. The area was evacuated, and counter-terrorism units were deployed to the scene. Police managed to detain her without injury to anyone else. No explosives were found. But the image of a woman in black, holding a child's head, shouting about retribution and religion, it became one of the most viral and haunting moments in Russian media history. It was immediately branded as a potential terrorist incident. But as investigators would soon learn, the reality was more complex and perhaps even more tragic. Chapter 4. Psychosis, not terrorism. Initial reports fueled fears of religiously motivated terrorism. Meshcheryakova's cries of Allahu Akbar and references to bombings echoed global headlines dominated by extremist violence. But as authorities probed deeper into her background, a very different picture emerged. Meshcheryakova was not part of any terrorist cell. She had no known links to Islamist radical groups. Instead, forensic psychologists concluded she was in the grip of acute paranoid schizophrenia. Her references to religion and violence were delusions, part of her psychotic breakdown. She claimed to hear voices that instructed her to kill the child because of infidelity in the family, asserting that her actions were a form of divine punishment. Investigators discovered that she had been previously institutionalized in Uzbekistan and had failed to continue treatment after arriving in Russia. No one monitored her condition. No system required mental health checks for domestic workers. The family who hired her was completely unaware of her psychiatric history. She reportedly told police she had watched extremist videos online and had become obsessed with the idea of martyrdom, but again, no evidence supported a link to actual terrorism. Her condition had clearly worsened, but she had slipped through every crack in the system. Chapter 5. Immigration, Psychiatry, and the Law. The Meshcheryakova case quickly exploded into a national debate. It forced Russia to confront uncomfortable truths about how it treats migrants, how it handles mental health, and how it regulates domestic labor. The fact that she was from Uzbekistan, a former Soviet republic, fueled anti-immigrant sentiment. Many Russians began to call for tighter restrictions on Central Asian workers, especially those working in homes with children. At the same time, critics pointed out the complete lack of infrastructure to manage or monitor mental illness among immigrant laborers. Meshcheryakova's schizophrenia had been formally diagnosed years earlier, but that information was never shared with Russian authorities, nor were there any policies in place to flag someone with her history. Furthermore, there were no requirements for families to conduct psychological evaluations on the nannies they hired, a practice rarely considered at the time. The tragedy highlighted the legal and systemic gaps in Russia's domestic employment sector, where trust often replaces verification and where desperation for work pushes many into jobs they're unfit for. Public discourse was polarized. Some argued that the government had failed to protect children by not regulating caregivers more strictly. Others blamed the increasing Islamophobia and xenophobia that quickly overtook the conversation, arguing that focusing on religion rather than mental illness was both inaccurate and harmful. Chapter 6. Devastation behind closed doors. For the family of little Nastya, life would never return to normal. Their daughter had been murdered in the most grotesque way imaginable, not by a stranger, but by the very person they had hired to protect her. The grief was compounded by guilt, as they struggled with the unbearable reality that they had unwittingly left their child in harm's way. Neighbors described the family as private but loving. The child's mother, who had reportedly left the apartment that morning shortly before the murder, was said to be in complete emotional collapse. The father withdrew from public view entirely. The public attention surrounding the case meant the family could not grieve in peace. For months, the media continued to speculate about what they knew or didn't know, but there was no evidence they had any reason to suspect Meshcheryakova was dangerous. There were no previous signs of violence, and she had worked for them without major incident. In the days following the murder, many Moscow families began to panic. Some dismissed their nannies. Others turned to agencies demanding stricter screening. There was a collective realization that trust alone was not enough, and that the safety of children depended on systems, not assumptions. Chapter 7. A city-haunted Anastasiya Meshcheryakova was ruled criminally insane. A Russian court declared her unfit to stand trial and committed her to a psychiatric institution indefinitely. Legally, the case was closed, but emotionally, socially, and politically, the city of Moscow and much of Russia was left shaken. The haunting footage of her on the street remains one of the most disturbing public images in recent Russian history, not because it depicted a terrorist, but because it showed a complete collapse of every protective system, healthcare, immigration checks, employment screening, and mental health infrastructure. Today, Meshcheryakova remains in a secure psychiatric facility. There's no indication she will ever be released, but her name is remembered not for who she was, but for what she did and what her actions revealed about the dangers of untreated mental illness, societal neglect, and the human cost of institutional failure. The tragedy of little Nastia's death is not just the story of a brutal crime. It's a warning, a signal flare in the dark, reminding everyone that silence, bureaucracy, and ignorance can sometimes be just as deadly as any weapon. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.